The White House has intensified the push in the past month in particular to get 70% of adults vaccinated by July 4th. That, however, is proving to be difficult for the black community. The Biden administration knows the key to a successful COVID vaccination campaign would be reaching the most vulnerable population, but according to the CDC, less than a quarter of black Americans had received their first COVID-19 shot as of June 3rd. Earlier, I talked to Dr. Cameron Webb, senior advisor to the COVID-19 White House Equity Task Force, and asked him about this disparity. Take a listen. Dr. Webb, thank you so much for joining me, sir. So the Biden administration has made outreach and inclusion a central part of its COVID-19 response and push for the vaccine. However, black people still lag significantly behind other groups of people. In fact, as of June 7th, I think only about a quarter of black people in America have received their first dose of the vaccine. To what do you attribute this?
Well, first off, that statistic is actually inaccurate. You know, there's some data that's available that kind of describes that, you know, less than one quarter, but that's really based on 62% of people where we know the race and ethnicity of the individuals vaccinated. So that's not you. I think the best numbers for us to look at are going to be based on the breakdown of who's been vaccinated and the percentage of those, because we can compare that to the percentage of the population. And at present, we're at about 9% of those vaccinated are black, and that's compared to 12.4% of the population at large. So yes, we do still have some progress to make up. And systemic racism, structural inequality, you know, going back generations, both historical and contemporary, that we have to navigate in this pandemic response effort. And so, you know, this vaccination effort has been designed to navigate a lot of those factors, and it's making progress. If you look over the last 2 weeks, the breakdown of those individuals vaccinated is actually about 11.3% black. So that tells you we're making more and more progress week over week. We're still pressing toward the mark, but we're trying to understand exactly what the challenges are. And what we've seen in the black community, biggest barriers for folks who want to get vaccinated and haven't yet, it's things like transportation, childcare, time off of work, or places that they feel comfortable going to get vaccinated. And so we've designed initiatives around all of those. So the key here is just making sure we're listening, engaging with community members and leaders, and being responsive. And I think that's been our mantra since the beginning, and that's the reason why we're seeing progress.
So I just want to be clear about something. Are you saying that the differential between the degree to which black people have been vaccinated and other people have been vaccinated is small and therefore not substantial?
Oh, I didn't suggest that at all. No. What I said is that 25% statistic is actually an inaccurate statistic. And it's, you know, again, it's based on the total population. So you got the entire population, you're comparing or contrasting that with only 62% of the vaccinated folks where we know their race or ethnicity. It's not to say there isn't a gap. Those gaps exist. And that's why I was describing the gap of 9% of those vaccinated who are black compared to 12.4% of the population as a whole. That's a better metric for us to use to track equity in terms of the vaccination effort, or we can use surrogates like, you know, the social vulnerability index to get a better sense, so that we're looking at all of the vaccinated people and not just 62%, right? But I think that the key here is to know that, yes, we know there are gaps. That's the reason why we're designing so many programs to close those gaps. And if you look at the white population vaccinated over the last 2 weeks, only 44% of the vaccinations in communities of color. The president kind of assured that all adults have access to vaccines as of April 19th. And so we've seen since that time really ongoing progress. We're not there yet. That's why we're pressing so hard toward the mark. But it's just saying we're making progress, and we have to be creative and really lean into engaging communities and not try to decide this from Washington, D.C. This has to play out in a very local, grassroots, community-based way.
Right, but you were describing earlier the access issues. You know, there are two things happening, right? So there's hesitancy, but then there's the access thing is just really real, and some people think that putting too much emphasis on the hesitancy is problematic and actually maybe even dangerous because it shifts away from focusing on access, which is huge. for this community of people. What is the Biden administration doing specifically around the issue of access, other than, I've heard the president say several times we have 95% of people live within 5 miles or whatever, 3 miles of a vaccination site. What else is being done?
Yeah, Charles, and that's what I was describing earlier. So you're absolutely right. Hesitancy is a part of the equation, but we start with access. Until you've got access, we're not even going to talk about your attitude toward getting vaccinated. And what access means is that we have sufficient vaccines in your community. And by and large, there are a lot of vaccines in communities all over the country at this point. That's not true access. And so what I described in my first response was the main barriers to access, the barriers to true access in the vaccination effort. If you survey people, particularly if you survey Black people who say they either are vaccinated or want to get vaccinated, those who still haven't yet been vaccinated, they give really 4 answers as to why not. The first is the ability to have time off of work, and that's why the president created that mechanism for tax credits for small and medium-sized businesses to make sure that everybody can get paid time off. The second is access to childcare. You have to have somewhere to drop your kids, and that's why just last week we announced kindergarten CAs are offering free childcare drops so folks can go get vaccinated. Another one is transportation, and we've been partnering with county, city transportation groups all over the country. Over 350 of these are offering transportation options in localities, because even if you say there's a vaccine within 5 miles, that's a long way if you don't have a car, if you don't have a means of transportation. So we want to make that a possibility as well. And then the final is just saying, is there somewhere close to me that I trust and where I feel comfortable getting vaccinated? And that's why we've been pushing all of our partners, the 21 federal pharmacy partners, pushing them to work with community-based and faith-based organizations to make sure we're offering vaccines in safe and convenient community locations, as well as new initiatives like the Shots at the Shop Barbershop Initiative, where we're partnering with barbershops and beauty salons to make sure we're getting vaccines there. We're really trying to use and explore every single mechanism, and that's just for the folks who already are at yes, who already want to get vaccinated and just want to navigate those those barriers. And that's access is truly about. So you're absolutely right. We've got to start with the access issues before we can get into the hesitancy challenges. But for us, we do both at the same time.
Let's zoom out a little bit, because a lot of the initiatives you just described are actually, situational to now, right? So this is something we can do right now to deal with the access issues we have right now. But the structural part of these access issues do not go away. All the scientists tell us that it's not a question of if there will be another pandemic, but when. How do we prepare these communities for the next pandemic once we get out of the woods on this one, if we, beyond just the situational fixes to things right now, but dealing with structural access?
That is the key to this response. It's one thing if this response, yields us some progress in the short term. The real game here is making sure that at the end of the day, what we learn from this is that our country wasn't adequate for a pandemic over some communities. Historically, marginalized populations were particularly left in harm's way. And so part of what the president's doing is expanding the public health workforce. That was 100,000 new people in the public health workforce that's been decimated over the past few decades. And it's because we need folks in communities ready to do public health work. And not just any folks. The other thing about this endeavor, there was $7.6 billion that went toward this in the American Rescue Plan. But the other big thing about that is that we're talking about people in community, from community, right? So creating jobs for individuals who are able to engage in a way that's authentic, that's real, and that's from that community. I think that's going to be a real key. With the president he issued an executive order, the Equitable Data Working Group, and that Equitable Data Working Group is making sure that in the future, we're not sitting here saying we only have 62% of the data on who's being vaccinated. We are preparing an infrastructure to know exactly who's been vaccinated and when and where they've been vaccinated. Again, that wasn't ready on the effect, the ramifications of that. We cannot let that stand. So it created a whole bunch of moments where we recognize, our infrastructure was not adequately poised to ensure an equitable response to a pandemic, or in some instances to ensure a response to a pandemic, period. That's just a few of the ideas of the options. But what I'll tell you is there is the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force being led by Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith. That's based out of HHS. It's got 12 individuals from across the country, experts in health equity and from community communities, really focusing on different demographics and populations, and they're convening every couple of weeks to answer the very question that you're asking. They'll come out with a final set of recommendations on how we make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. So, certainly these are the types of steps, this is the process you need to go through to make sure that we do this better and that we move toward a more equitable process. But at the end of the day, the proof is going to be how well we implement and execute recommendations.
Dr. Webb, I want to thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care.